The divided monarchy Israelite warrior. The political unity forged under David and Solomon did not survive their dynasty. Upon Solomon's death around 930 BC, the kingdom fractured into two independent entities, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. While the division was rooted in political, economic, and tribal grievances, its consequences were most starkly felt in the sphere of military affairs. No longer able to pool manpower or resources on the same scale as the united monarchy, both Israel and Judah found themselves vulnerable to larger, more centralized foreign powers. The resulting centuries were marked by nearly constant warfare, both offensive and defensive, interspersed with shifting alliances, internal revolts, and foreign interventions. This era witnessed the increasing professionalization of the Israelite and Judean military systems, though still limited in scope and resources. The divided kingdoms were smaller than their imperial neighbors and were repeatedly drawn into the geopolitical orbit of dominant powers like Aram-Damascus, Assyria, and later Egypt and Babylon. These encounters forced adaptation. Exposure to foreign tactics, technologies, and military organization shaped both kingdoms in distinct but overlapping ways. Military structure and foreign influence. The northern kingdom of Israel was larger, wealthier, and initially more powerful than Judah. However, it also suffered from greater political instability, with frequent coups and assassinations disrupting continuity in leadership. This volatility affected the consistency of military organization. Israel's armies were raised through a system of levies and supplemented by hired mercenaries or tribal militias during emergencies. Notably, under King Omri, RC 885 to 874 BC, and his successors, Israel invested heavily in urban fortifications and centralized administrative centers, indicating an organized approach to defense and internal control. Yet this did not prevent its eventual collapse under Assyrian assault in 722 BC. Judah, though smaller and less densely populated, benefited from a more stable dynastic lineage and stronger ideological identity centered on Jerusalem and the Davidic monarchy. Over time, Judah developed a more consistent military hierarchy, likely built around garrisons stationed in major towns and fortified centers. Levy systems continued to supply the bulk of manpower. Still, elite palace units and specialized troops, often referenced in royal inscriptions or biblical narratives, formed a permanent or semi-permanent core. This included royal guards, slingers, archers, and possibly engineers or sappers for siege warfare. The Assyrian Empire, which dominated the region during the 8th and 7th centuries BC, left a particularly profound impact. The siege of Lachish in 701 BC, documented in Sennacherib's palace reliefs at Nineveh, provides one of the most detailed visual records of Judean military equipment. Though filtered through imperial propaganda, these depictions offer rare insights into how Judah's defenders appeared and were armed in actual conflict. Weaponry and metallurgical continuities. By this period, iron had fully displaced bronze as the standard material for weapons. Iron swords, spearheads, and arrowheads were now ubiquitous throughout the Levant. Though the basic forms remained functional and familiar. Short swords for close combat, spears for thrusting and throwing. The refinement of ironworking allowed for better balance, sharper edges, and longer durability. Leaf-shaped blades, still common, coexisted with straight-edged designs, some of which were possibly influenced by Assyrian and Egyptian prototypes. Spearheads in this period were more standardized in socket design, allowing for more efficient attachment to wooden shafts. This suggests both improved craftsmanship and greater consistency in military provisioning. Arrowheads, typically trilobate, three-bladed, could penetrate armor or shields more effectively than earlier designs. Their widespread use in siege contexts, both by and against the Assyrians, speaks to their tactical significance. Slingstones and javelins remained part of the arsenal, especially for lighter troops and irregular levies. Projectile weapons continued to be essential. The bow, both simple and possibly composite variants, saw extensive use. Arrows tipped with iron or bronze heads were capable of significant damage, and massed archery likely played a major role in both open field and siege engagements. The sling retained its utility due to its ease of use and low cost. Elite slingers may have been employed in fixed defensive positions, as suggested by some defensive tower designs at fortified sites like Lachish and Tel Arad. Armor and personal protection. Helmets became more common, particularly among professional or elite troops. The most frequently depicted design in Assyrian reliefs is the conical helmet, often constructed from bronze or iron. These helmets may have included internal padding or leather liners to improve comfort and fit. While their protective value was limited compared to later full helm designs, they offered a critical degree of protection against glancing blows and falling debris in siege conditions. Body armor was still not universally worn. Scale armor remained the most advanced form of torso protection, and was limited to higher-ranking soldiers or those in specialized roles. Constructed from overlapping metal scales sewn onto a fabric or leather backing, this type of armor was labor-intensive and expensive. A variant of lamellar armor, where small metal plates were laced together rather than sewn, may have appeared under foreign influence, but is less commonly attested. Most rank-and-file soldiers fought in simple tunics, occasionally reinforced with thick belts or layered garments to offer minimal protection. Shields and defensive gear. Shield design diversified to meet the demands of new battlefield tactics. Rectangular and oval shields gained prominence, often constructed from a wooden frame covered in hide and edged with metal or rawhide for durability. Larger shields provided increased body coverage and were likely used by heavy infantry or those defending fixed positions. Smaller, round shields remained in use by skirmishers and archers for mobility and ease of use. These shields were not merely functional, they also signaled the social rank and tactical role of the bearer. An officer or palace guard might carry a larger reinforced shield emblazoned with decorative elements, while a conscript would possess a more rudimentary model. Again, uniformity was absent. Shield style and decoration varied depending on regional preferences, economic capacity, and tactical doctrine. Appearance and military identity. Despite increasing military contact with imperial forces, the armies of Israel and Judah did not develop standardized uniforms. Soldiers are consistently shown in local dress. Short tunics, often belted at the waist, with optional cloaks or capes in cooler conditions. Footwear ranged from simple sandals to bare feet, depending on terrain and unit type. Facial hair and grooming followed traditional Israelite patterns, with no visible adoption of foreign styles, such as the clean-shaven faces favoured in Egyptian iconography. In visual terms, Israelite and Judean forces remained internally diverse, while better-equipped troops, often associated with royal service or urban garrisons, may have shared similar gear. The broader army reflected regional variation and personal provisioning. Military identity was thus shaped more by function, archer, spearman, slinger, and equipment than by visual cohesion. Strategic doctrine and operational limits. Strategically, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah operated under constraints dictated by geography, population, and the demands of neighboring empires. Both relied on fortified cities to serve as administrative centers and defensive bastions. Cities such as Samaria, Lachish, and Jerusalem were heavily fortified, with double walls, towers, and in some cases water supply systems designed to withstand prolonged sieges. The use of levied forces continued, often supplemented by mercenaries or auxiliaries in moments of crisis. King Amaziah of Judah famously hired northern Israelite mercenaries, 2 Chronicles 25:6, a decision he later reversed under prophetic rebuke. Such accounts suggest that neither kingdom possessed sufficient standing armies to respond to all threats independently. Instead, they drew upon kinship networks, tribal levies, and foreign soldiers to supplement their defenses. Tactically, the kingdoms increasingly adopted siege techniques and defensive strategies adapted from their imperial adversaries. While neither Israel nor Judah could field siege engines on the scale of Assyria, evidence of ramp construction and battering rams, either in use or in countermeasures, suggests some degree of engineering knowledge. Warfare during this period was frequently defensive, protecting cities, withstanding sieges, and mounting local counterattacks rather than pursuing sustained offensive campaigns. The growing reliance on defensive warfare reshaped how military leaders thought about conflict. Rather than focusing on expansion or conquest, much of the military doctrine centered on preserving autonomy, negotiating tributes, and surviving imperial aggression. Tactical flexibility, diplomatic agility, and the ability to mobilize levies quickly were more valuable than the maintenance of a large standing force. Cognitive frameworks and military culture. Militarily, the leaders of both Israel and Judah did not operate in isolation from their religious and ideological environments. Kingship was still closely tied to military success, but prophetic critique of militarism became increasingly prominent, especially in Judah. Prophets like Isaiah and Micah warned against reliance on foreign alliances or large armies, advocating instead for covenantal fidelity as the true safeguard of national security. These critiques were not merely theological, they reflected awareness of the political and economic strains caused by militarization and imperial entanglement. This tension between military pragmatism and prophetic resistance created a distinctive cultural framework in which warfare was interpreted. Victories were seen not only as the result of strategic planning, but also of divine favor. Defeats, especially catastrophic ones like the fall of Samaria, 722 BC, or the destruction of Lachish, 701 BC, were similarly understood through a theological lens, often as judgment for corruption or idolatry. This dual framework, practical on the ground, theological in hindsight, shaped how both kingdoms perceived and conducted war. Conclusion. By the final decades of the 7th century BC, both Israel and Judah had been drawn into the increasingly aggressive campaigns of imperial powers, first Assyria, then Babylon. The fall of the northern kingdom in 722 BC had already demonstrated the limits of local resistance. Judah's survival, though prolonged, would ultimately face the same fate in 586 BC, with the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. As exile replaced sovereignty, the military traditions developed during the monarchic periods were either extinguished or forced to adapt under foreign rule.